My name is Michael Brough. I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement for the Leadership Roundtable. That means that I have the privilege of engaging wonderful people like yourselves in the temporal affairs of the church. And perhaps the more challenging part of my job is encouraging church leaders to avail themselves of your expertise and willingness to assist. For this closing session, we've actually asked Dennis Cheesebrow to, over the last 2 days, listen to the various presentations, the keynote addresses, and your conversation and suggestion after each of those presentations. He's also picked up on some of the concrete suggestions which have already come out of the 2 work group sessions that you have. And just a reminder, any scribes in the room, if you have not yet posted the report from your group up on the Standards for Excellence online forum, please do so. So what we are going to do with today's session is hear from Dennis, if you like, a third-party synthesis or perspective of what we have heard over these last 3 days. And after Dennis gives us that brief overview, we're then going to open up to a final conversation that really raises up just a few of the questions that we've addressed over the last 2 days. So the first question that was on the agenda, advertising our session, our meeting this year, which spoke about what new innovations and structures and partnerships does the church need in order to thrive? What practical first steps can we take in creating such collaborations and partnerships, what you've just been discussing in your work groups? And perhaps most importantly from yesterday, Jeff Bois's question to you all, which many of you responded to at the time and then subsequently. What strategic advice can you provide to us at the Leadership Roundtable in terms of the key issues of concern that we need to begin working on, that we need to focus on, and indeed that can lead us into our regional roundtable meeting and next year's annual meeting as well? So it's an honor to be able to introduce Dennis Cheesebrow. Dennis is the founder and president of Teamworks International. He's an organizational coach and a consultant with over 20 years experience working with a wide variety of groups. Dennis also recently published his first book, Partnership Redefined. Yes, he did sign my copy for me, but I'm not getting any money for promoting his book. But we thought Partnership Redefined was an excellent topic and subject that might be of interest as we explore the questions of partnerships and collaboration. So please join me in welcoming Dennis Cheesebrow.
Well, thank you, Michael, and all the members of the Roundtable. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be able to serve this role. I'm going to take you, if we take a look at the title, the purpose of this is to assist, to clarify, to help synthesize through what comments I might have, as well as your own closing discussions about how to move to action, which is, I believe, a unique and distinct element of the Roundtable. I think it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, part of a discussion. The purpose of the Roundtable was not to talk. It was to lead to change. So if we're just going to talk, let's go home. And I went, well, there's an interesting way for a group to begin. So our hope is that it leads to action and to commitment. But I'd like to take you back to a moment about, I think it was about 2.5 months ago. And if, General, if you'd permit me, I'll use your language. There we were. It was organized that I have a phone call with a gentleman that I heard so much about and never met, which was Jim. And he gets on the phone, we do the blah, blah, blah introduction, and he said, we'd like to talk with you about if you'd be able to do something for the Roundtable. And I'd been talked to about, I said, I'd love to be able to talk about the things in the book. And he goes, I'm sure it's a really fine book, but no. And he said, we actually want you to do something completely different, which hasn't been done. And in the back of my mind, I heard this little musical theme called dun, 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 dun. And he says, if you would be willing to, we don't want you to have any presentation, any thoughts, any ideas, and don't prepare anything. We'd like you just to listen. And then I thought, well, do you turn down a general over the phone that you know you're going to meet? So I said I would, and I would just say it's been a learning experience for me, and I hope that some of these thoughts and reflections and listening might provide some value to you and to the roundtable going forward. So some reflections. 4 levels of reflections that have hit me in listening to all of the presentations, to looking at what's been put online on the blog, and I had the opportunity to do some just walking into groups over the last day. And that would be some preferences for collaboration that I heard over and over and over again. That there's some choices that we could make about how we collaborate. So some collaboration preferences. What I also heard was consistent themes, maybe not in this language, but about a systemic view of how collaboration can work, and then a strategic view to pay attention to when collaborating. And then last but not least, I've got some work for you to do. Okay, before we begin questions. That's your reflections. So we have some questions for that. Some collaboration preferences that I heard over and over again. And that is, if we're going to collaborate, then let's individually and as groups operate in partnership rather than isolation. Over and over again, it was a preference to be able to, if I have a choice of preferences, do I choose partnership or isolation? Choose partnership if you're confused. So that's how preferences work. If you're confused, choose one. If you're confused about whether it should be about abundance or scarcity, choose abundance. I was struck by both the sharings and the presentations of how much the movement forward on the mission and the benefit of the church came from individuals realizing there was much more abundance than we ever realized. We may have thought we were being driven by scarcity, but in fact we're being driven by discovering where the abundance is. Think about that next time someone says we don't have enough money. I was working with a group of 6 parishes and this came up. And I said, the issue that you have is in these 6 parishes you have too much money. You think you're in scarcity. You're overwhelming. We're overflowing here with cash. What? I said, think about it. You're operating at over $20 million of cash, and you say you don't have any. It's about what you do with it. Abundance versus scarcity. A calling forth versus a doing for. I was struck both by the Father Paul Fila's writing in the first document that came with your registration, and I've had the wonderful experience of listening. He was a weekend priest in one of our parishes for a number of years when he was teaching at the seminary, and I could tell you he's wonderful, wonderful priest to listen to and how he preaches. And that calling forth of what already is there, not a doing for people that can't figure it out. A calling forth in what is already there in the community, in society. And I think you heard that from the CRS presentation, all the way through the sisters' presentation, all the way through Catholic Charities presentation, over and over again. It was the calling forth, and that's where the abundance was found. The laboring together in the mud versus trying to influence afar and not be touched. So again, we hear more and more that in service of the church, that collaborations work better if we know that we have to labor together and do some hard work. That dialogue seems to work better than debating positions. Have you ever been to a conference where all it is debating of positions? Anybody? Just me? Okay, 2 of us. Oh, 3, 4. And you wonder at the end, why did we spend all this time debating positions if we weren't ever going to be willing to learn from each other? So that learning versus winning and losing, it might be a hallmark or something to think of collaborations. And also to think of the difference between mission and identity. I'll talk a little bit more about this. But in working with institutions within the church as well as parishes and schools, I will tell you that when I've been in the room and collaboration is not working, it's because the mission of the parish is not the mission of the church, it's the preservation of identity. They don't care about the mission of the church. They'll preserve their identity at all costs. So for collaboration, is the mission front and center? And is it shared? And subsidiarity versus control. To enter into a partnership hoping that you're going to preserve your identity, to win, to control, to debate, to influence, to do for, out of isolation and scarcity, I'm just going to make just a wild guess here, probably it's not going to work very much. So I'd like you to think of, to do one thing, is to say right now as you look at this list of 8 preferences, and if you were to think about your history of collaboration, you as an individual, which preferences do you typically operate from either side? And what might cause you to move to the preferences on the right versus the preferences on the left? What in any given situation would cause you to choose differently? We'll move on. Or as Jim would say, hold that thought. A systemic view of collaboration. I was struck how many times in talking about collaboration, presenters and in the small groups discussions, we're covering 3 different arenas of work. What is the work and purpose of our parishes, dioceses, schools, institutions, organizations? What are the resources, human, financial, and physical, that we have? And our programs and services. But then we jumped into, and how do we organize all of those? And thirdly, what is the culture or mission in which we operate? And I found that, are we taking a systemic view? Every time it seemed that we were talking about successes and collaboration, the stories being told were covering all 3 areas. And what I constantly heard was that you have to pay attention to culture. You have to pay attention to culture. Sometimes in our planning and sometimes in our collaboration, we spend a lot of time talking about work and money and organization and structure. But as we heard this morning, we need to sit down and work out the mission and the core values first, and then begin to look at the others. And yet I'd offer for you is that our lunchtime presentation was very much rooted in the organizational arena. In a word, do you have your act together? So I took from this morning's presentation, from the Pope saying about the professional competence, right? That's work. That's the quality of the people doing the work. I heard this afternoon at lunch, do you have your act together around the organizational requirements to make that organization run? And I think we heard last night and this morning about the importance of culture. So you might think as you work in collaborations, to what degree are we pay attention to a systemic view in which those preferences we talked about before might work. And I'd like to take a look at a strategic view. So we looked at preferences, a systemic, now a strategic view. I don't know how many times in the last day and a half, I've heard the words efficiency and capacity. So as is my habit, I began to draw. And said, I keep hearing about how can we increase efficiency and how can we increase capacity. And you can look at these 4 quadrants, and I'd offer you this, is that many times when organizations go into collaborations and strategic work, they confuse work of efficiency with movements of capacity development. They think they're the same. And yet strategy and collaboration gains clarity and coherence if you can differentiate between, is it efficiency work or capacity building work? The next slide I'm going to tell you, show you just a few key differences. Many times when you're doing efficiency work, the end is somewhat determined. You're operating within the current frame of reference. Think of work, structure, culture. We're trying to do much of the same thing in much of the same way, better, cheaper, more effectively. That's efficiency improvement. Many times that work is actually largely management work. It's manage when I must. It's end determined to a great degree. And sometimes you need to do that in order to do capacity development work, which is quite different. It's an end in view. I told Jim this morning, I really liked his explanation of strategy, that it was beyond the horizon, without the answers. You didn't know the how. Because as you were saying that, I wrote down on a sheet of paper capacity development. It's an end in view. You don't have the answers. You can't manage your way. You have to partner, collaborate your way into a new understanding. When you're in this, it is almost always on the right-hand side under capacity development is almost always a new frame of reference. Efficiency is almost always an old frame of reference. And it's the shifting of that can change. If it permit, I'm going to offer a story not from the last 2 days, but from some of the work. I think you're smart enough to make the translation. A lot of the work that we do is in education and in public education. In this case, we're working with a school with an awful record, tremendous low learning and gap, low morale, high tension, one of the fun things. So we're sitting with a group of teachers late in the afternoon, and I said what I'd like you to do is just show the difference, that you can't close the gap with your current frame of reference. I said, you're exquisitely designed for low learning. It's not coincidence. You're designed so well, it will never change. Oh, and I said, I can demonstrate this very simply. How many hours a week do you work? And teacher said, anybody want to guess? 60, 24/7. Someone said 38.5. I went, oh, contract. We ended up with 55 hours a week. I said, okay, 55 hours a week. I said, how much do you get paid? And they said, well, we get paid X amount. I said, so you get paid X amount for 55 hours a week. Oh, no. We get paid X amount for this, and the rest of it we should be paid for. I said, if you've been doing this for 10 or 20 years, you get paid X amount for 55 hours a week. Oh, I said, when do you go home? Well, 2:30. Why do you go home at 2:30? Someone says it's the end of duty day. Oh, what do you do when you get home? I start working again. So why do you go home to work alone? So they looked at me and I said, what would happen if you stayed until 5:30 or 6 like everybody else? So I said, well, we can't do that. I said, do the math, it'd be less hours. So all of a sudden we had a school going, you mean if we stayed till 5:30? I said, you'd have 10 to 12 hours a week for collaborative work, for co-learning, for professional development, for looking at data. And all of a sudden, I said, just think about that. In a half hour, a group of teachers had restructured a weekly calendar of what they could do differently and cut their hours and not work on weekends. They got over to here and someone said, well, if we did this, I bet you our student learning would increase. I said, you've just changed your design. And it cost you no more money. So sometimes it's not just about having more, sometimes it's about doing differently. So capacity development is doing different things differently. Efficiency work is doing much of the same thing, faster, quicker, better. Think in the work of your collaborations that you're thinking of. I'm going to have you reflect on this. What in your collaborations is the difference between the efficiency work that you're collaborating around versus the capacity development work? One way of looking at this is that many times when you do capacity development work, you have to increase the capacity first, do different work, identify that, before you can increase the efficiency of it. It's a legitimate strategy. And what struck me this morning about CRS is CRS said this, in a nutshell, CRS said this is our strategy. You listen to what was said, when Carolyn said, when we do emergency work, what did she say they do? We don't collaborate. We know exactly what we need to do. It's manage because we must. There's urgency. I would suggest that was a raise of efficiency. Then we stabilize. Then we transform. That's the strategy. So it's a simple way of looking at a strategic view of collaboration. So some questions for your reflection. Because we figured you've had a lot of time to talk, maybe some time to think. And if you'd like to write down your own answers, that'd be fine. There will be no handing in. There is no test. Where and who do you serve? What preferences are present, or what preferences are needed for a collaboration? So think of a single collaboration you're involved in or thinking about. And I'm quickly going to go back here. And which of these are present and which of these are needed for that collaboration to work? Another question of that culture, work, and organization. In that collaboration, what are the shared and what are the divergent systemic views? Where are you together with those who are collaborating? Where are you apart? Another question. In this collaboration you're imagining or engaged in, where is increased efficiency needed? Where's capacity development needed? And what influence will authority, power, and politic play? So my hope is that these reflections for around this conference as well as for you might assist in a call to and a commitment for action.
Thanks very much, Dennis, for those thoughts and for the stimulating questions for us. The floor is now open to all of you. We have about half an hour, 35 minutes. Looking for your suggestions, your comments, your criticisms, your challenges. Those of us up here are delighted if you choose to address your comments to each other and respond to that rather than ask us questions. That would work for us as well. But you do have Jim and Dennis here as well. So any thoughts after our 2 days reflecting on the theme of partnership and collaboration? And again, if you could say your name and where you're from, that helps us.
I don't see Brian Hare here. Is he here? Brian, you want to pose, could you just pose the thing that you and I were talking about?
And you can volunteer somebody else to speak if...
This is called getting elected for a ticket that doesn't have any party. No, I just mentioned to Jeff yesterday when he said, give us some ideas about the future. These are what we've done and we're working on what about the future. And I'm sure there are people in this room that have better judgment on this than I do. But my own sense, looking at the church in the United States, is that in multiple dioceses over the next 10 to 15 years, dioceses will be involved, and already are involved, some of them completed the work, of restructuring, reorganizing, and reorganizing in light of fewer professional clergy, larger engagement of the laity, reducing parishes, that kind of thing. And my sense is that that's a three-step process. The first one is you recognize the need to do it, and by this time I think that's fairly universal in the church in the United States. Almost everybody recognizes a need to do business differently. Secondly, then you need, I think, good theology and good pastoral sensitivity to design a plan to do it differently. And that requires good theological grounding. We're Catholic, we're not Congregationalist, we're not Unitarian. That has things to deal with. It takes pastoral sensitivity in terms of the needs of people, the stress on people, ethnic and religious communities, how we deal with that. That's the first two steps. Then the third step is implementation. And there, I think, I'm not positive we're ready to do that well. That we could get the first two steps right and not get the third step right. Or at least that's my impression. I think of, in my own diocese, we're going from 292 parishes to 125, what we call pastoral sites. If you go back 8 more years from where we are, we've gone from 370 to 125. It seems to me if there were a corporation doing that, a bank doing that, a governmental organization doing that, the military doing that, that would be regarded as a major structural change. I'm not positive that that step is a guaranteed success. I'm not positive what we need to do it, who we need to do it, how we need to do it, but I do think that's a qualitative step, and I do think that the resources of this organization committed to finance, human resources, and structure and organization, that sounds like a good ticket for this organization over time. Maybe not the thing you do tomorrow, but I think we're going to need to deal with this over the next 10 to 15 years in the church in the United States to get to the point where our organization matches our pastoral challenge.
Thank you, Father Brown.
I'm Trish Sullivan-Navani. I'm publisher at Liturgical Press. I'd like to publicly share an observation I shared in our small group for the Leadership Roundtable visionaries. One of the things I would like to see the Leadership Roundtable take on, it's already something you do, but even more actively, is what Carolyn Moo expressed to us, which is become a mechanism by which the dots get connected. One of the pitfalls of any organization that sees needs and then starts developing projects and programs is to add to the pool of what's already there. And as someone who led 2 national ministries, one of the things I know is that we have an abundance of organizations serving the vitality and ministry of the church. Many of them find themselves in competition for resources because they're serving comparable constituencies with nuanced, different approaches. So the toolkit, as fabulous as it is, and I think it is fabulous, is an example of where there are comparable sorts of things happening. And to see yourselves less engaged with creating new products and more engaged with breaking through boundaries, because the nature of our governance mitigates against that. The nature of our governance keeps everyone looking locally, keeps everyone relating to their chief executive, for lack of a better word, the bishop, as the governing factor, the decision maker, and the way we sort of operationalize and organize our ministry. Much harder, if I'm in the Diocese of Metuchen, to be able to look across the country to San Jose and say, they know how to do multicultural ministry in creative and interesting ways. They know how to mobilize a multiplicity of ethnicities in their ministry. We can learn from that. So this idea of being the force that creates constellations versus more stars in the galaxy is something I would like to see happen with the Roundtable. And in doing that, you stand to serve a need that I know a number of the executive directors of ministry organizations that are engaged with you, some of whom are in the room, need, which is to empower them, to empower their constituencies to engage more meaningfully in these long-established not-for-profit ministry groups that are suffering. Because as parish dollars deplete, their members are less equipped to pony up a membership, to engage new ministry folks in participating in the organizations. And then they have to, by nature of the market forces, get more and more insular. So you could empower them through that. So that's my observation for the future of the Roundtable.
Thank you, Trish.
Bob Boulogne, St. Thomas More at Yale. When I think of the preference between dialogue and debate, I was thinking back to Cardinal Bernardine of happy memory, who called for a Common Ground initiative. And I think it was the first time that cardinals publicly opposed each other, Law and O'Connor on the East Coast, castigating him for this watering down of theology. And my question is, what are strategies for addressing conflict about the value of dialogue? Students at Yale, one student said to me, when I hear what the bishops say, they sound like grandparents talking to rebellious teenagers. It isn't an adult-to-adult conversation, and the culture of dialogue that we had in the Peace Pastoral, for example, seems to be something of happy memory. And I'm just wondering, are there strategies for addressing the value of dialogue when that is such a point of contention in the church?
Thank you, Father Bob. Perhaps anyone in the room would like to respond, and certainly Dennis, Jim. It's a great question.
I would offer you a view from having experience working with communities around the issues of race, which might have some parallelism there, and that is when you're many times when there's those divisions, it's because the dialogue never gets into people willing to look at and respect each other's experience, their thinking, their feeling, and what they want. So what they do is they debate around the position, but they actually don't get a shared reality of each other. And so when we've been involved in public dialogue around, largely in public education, where there's issues of race and violence that's spilled out over in the community, there actually is a process that allows that conversation that first starts with, please be quiet and learn who I am, and I you, and realize that we will have different positions, but can we learn first before we talk about it? I would offer that if one of the pieces that we found, pieces of writing that I've found to be extremely helpful, is a book called Clear Leadership by Gervais Bush. And it is, in fact, one of the dialogue methodologies that we use that I found to be helpful. And possibly it might help in a situation like that.
Thank you.
Just trying to think if I had anything really meaningful to say, and the answer is probably no. Because I've been in organizations of both kinds. Ones that dialogue, healthy dialogue, was a part of the daily life of the organization. And in other organizations, other units, where you didn't say anything until the commander said something, and then what you could do was agree. And the only observation I have is that the first type that I mentioned only emerged when the seniorist of leader encouraged it and modeled it and exampled it. That it didn't happen naturally. And that, I'm talking about Army stuff, so you have to determine whether or not it applies to other professional areas. And it also seemed like the higher I rose in rank, the less dialogue occurred unless I was really pushing it. That as a captain, we argued with ourselves all the time. As a major, we argued ourselves all the time. All of a sudden, I got to be a colonel, and no one's arguing. I say, what happened here? Unless, you stimulate the argument. by asking for and demanding an answer to this. Look, I'm thinking about blank. What do you think? Well, no one's thinking. What do I need you? Oh, now there's an idea. Okay. I don't have a real answer, except if it's not valued by the leader, it's not going to be exampled in the organization.
Any other thoughts relating to that question?
I wasn't going to
No.
do it to that question. I was going to go back to the connecting the dots point, because that really was part of the purpose of the creation of the Leadership Roundtable, was to identify best practices, to communicate that throughout the system. But frankly, though, there are folks that where there are good ideas. Well, let me step back. In developing our strategy from the beginning, we reached out to a broad group of people, and we identified initially literally 90-some recommendations, distilled it down to 40 or 42, and got down to a smaller group than that. And this was then communicated back to the group, and then we started to prioritize, and it was only those that it was determined by the group, and the group meaning people like you from around the country, who said, even though there may be some good practices out there on this, it's not quite enough. And those are the ones that we have focused on in terms of trying to develop either a program or a product or a service. And in doing that, we're not looking to recreate the wheel. That's the last thing that we want to do. And so what we tend to try to do is to find other organizations that are doing something similar. If it's not quite what we've heard the market needs, then we try to work with that group or with a group of people who are focused on that issue and come up with something better. And so I just want to reassure you that from the very beginning of this organization, that's what we've been trying to do, which I think is reflective of what you were hoping for. I think one of the issues that confronts us all, though, now that we've been at it for several years, is how do we reach scale, and how do we communicate throughout the entire spectrum of the Catholic Church? We naively, I think, thought in the beginning that if we could identify, the Axis communicators, who we frankly thought was the Bishops' Council, and we've learned over the last several years that that's not the way the system works, and that the Catholic Church is even much bigger than that. And even though the diocesan infrastructure and the parish infrastructure is very important and you have to deal with it, that's only a portion of the Catholic community, and you all represent a lot of the rest of the Catholic community, because you're representing major nonprofit organizations that are focused on the industry. And so what we're trying to do now is to figure out strategies for taking these good ideas that are in fact around the church, whether we've identified them or helped create them, and how do you start to bring it to scale? And if I would say if there's a disappointment from my standpoint, is that we haven't been able to figure out the magic bullet for getting some of these things to scale more quickly. And it's not because people aren't interested in it, people are using it, people value it, but it's been a little bit more of a conundrum than. And so any thoughts that people have and suggestions for us in ways of doing that, we would be particularly appreciative.
Thank you, Jeff. Any thoughts on that scale question and how to join those dots and increase and improve the communications? Okay. Thank you.
My name is Bill Glover. I'm from the Archdiocese of Baltimore. And I think one of the things that I've come to realize, in having been in my role for a little over 13 years in the diocese, is that time isn't always or things don't move as quickly as we would want, as we hope, that we think makes sense. And patience is truly a virtue, but at the same time, we need to continue to push forward and continue to move forward. I heard a couple times over the last 2 days where individuals said that they put something in place 5 years ago, and then they forgot about it, and then it resurfaced, 5 years later, and all of a sudden people were asking about it. It almost seemed like it needed some time to mature, to be digested, and I think sometimes we are a bit impatient. We want it to happen much quicker. So I see that because I think that's probably the one thing that helps keep my sanity in my role and probably my patience in the role that I have within the diocese. To answer the question about how we might be able to connect some of the dots, some of the stars to be able to make those constellations, I think that there's a lot of good work that's being done also by some other organizations that try and bring collaboration amongst disciplines, and be it if it's the Association of Catholic Publishers, if it's an organization that I'm with, which is the Diocesan Information Systems Conference, where we come together and we do meet in similar fashion, and there is some level of degree of numbers of people that come together. And I would hope to think, and I think we're beginning to do this, at least from the DISC organization, to be able to leverage and partner with organizations like National Leadership Roundtable and others to be able to bring some continuity, because ultimately we're a symbiotic organization. We really are. I know within a diocese, if a parish is hurting or a school is hurting, it hurts the organization. I think the same thing happens with diocese. If a diocese is hurting, it hurts the church. If it's a Catholic organization, it has a tendency to affect. At the same time, when there's great prosperity, it affects it positively as well. So I think if there's a way to bring those partnerships and formulate those, I'd suggest that may be something to look at.
Thanks, Bill.
Paul Henderson from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Actually, it's a great question of scale, and I tried to think about some of the things that I've seen within the church or things that I've even been involved with over about 24 years. And then I just came up with some of these words, and I'm not sure if this is going to make any sense or not, but just some of the characteristics that I've found is that it has to be a real need rather than just a want, that the bishop, whoever the decision maker is, has to really need it and feel that it's a need rather than just something that is wanted. That a lot of times there's a window of opportunity that opens, and it's sort of like if you sort of got the game plan to jump into that window of opportunity, I've seen something really effective happens. It's really about getting the right relationships. And two other things that I've found is that it's about having patience, which I keep hearing folks talk about here. And then the other thing, and this is based on my own experience, it's about being in the right position. And as part of the institution, if you're in the right position, sometimes you can really jump on the opportunity, make something happen. But if you're not in the right position, then the window isn't always open. An example there's two examples that I've been part of. One was with World Youth Day in '93. It was a great opportunity for the church. And part of that was that the organizers saw it as an opportunity to do something more than the stated reality. So the stated reality is you bring a whole bunch of kids together with the Holy Father. The strategy behind that was to change the dynamic of the relationship of the U.S. Church with the Holy See, and to use the young people, in a sense, to do it. And then to connect the bishops with the young people. The other thing was that when the Bishops' Conference reorganized 5 years ago, there was a few of us who were in positions we're in the right positions where the right people were open to listening to us, and so we were able to do more than what we could have done if we weren't in those situations.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah,
Jim?
thank you. Mike, this is a concern. I don't have a strategy for this, but maybe I'm just sort of stating the obvious. But one of my concerns is for the generational future of the Catholic Church. Look around the room. We're not exactly reflective of, the generations to come. And when you look at the data about where the Catholic population positions itself on various issues, you see an enormous generational divide. So how we think about leadership for the church of the future, and obviously we have the church of the present that we're trying to address and develop strategies for, but the church of the future is going to be the church of the next generations. And with Ellie here, with all due deference, we need to think about what leadership means for the generations that are going to follow us. And my suspicion is, my sense is that the felt needs of the future generations are dramatically different than what we have articulated. Not to say that there aren't issues of structure, capacity, and everything else that are obviously part of what we're trying to address. Just a little, the highlight of my time with our Leadership Roundtable was about 4 or 5 years ago at a meeting at the Wharton School, and one of the panelists was Bill McGarvey, who is the director of Busted Halo, the Paulist Fathers radio show. He was brilliant, young guy who had his finger on the pulse of all things having to do with social media and networking, absolutely profound. And I sought him out afterwards and developed a nice relationship with him since then. But it was a sign to me that is the kind of person that we need engaged with the Leadership Roundtable and at this meeting in future years. And so anyway, anything we can do to strategize to address that next generation, I think, will be serving the church of the future.
So, Jim, could I ask you a favor and pass the microphone one row back? Ellie, having had a name check there, would you like to share a little bit about your experience with the STEAM program, but also, rather than us talking about what your generation might give as an answer to some of these questions, you might be able to offer, hey, here's one thing that I think we should be looking for and that Leadership Roundtable should be paying attention to.
Sure. Well, my name's Ellie. I'll be a senior at Stanford this year, and Carrie invited me when I was at the Capstone program, which is where all the STEAM programs throughout the nation, there's about 8 of them, came together. And so I'm really happy to be here. And actually, to address your concern, I'm here now, and I'm excited to help, however I can. I'm actually hoping to, form some kind of youth coalition to address, your concerns, if I'm invited to do so. I don't know. I'd love to provide whatever services I can, but I've had a really great time with the STEAM program, and really excited that this community is forming. And I would say the biggest thing I learned about STEAM is basically there was 20 of us or so that every 2 weeks we would meet to talk about our faith, and we touch upon every possible issue, just how we experience our faith in our own lives, to how we see Jesus and Catholicism in science and business and all these other things. And it was a really cool kind of springboard for how I kind of interact with my faith in other areas of my life, and I kind of want to continue to do so. So I would definitely say something that youth kind of looks for now is there's such a huge degree of uncertainty. Just, most of us are unemployed. We have no strong, financial security. We don't know what our calling is really. So I would definitely say mentorship is so crucial. And I kind of was talking about this earlier in the small sessions, that we all have different identities that we can fall back on. We went to different colleges from different areas. But if we can develop what it means to have a Catholic identity, excuse me, outside of just Mass and in business settings, in medicine, in law, I think that can have a profound effect on how the future of the church is going to come together. So.
Thank you so much, Ellie. You're a real sign of hope, I think, for all of us. If I can put in a real practical plug, so then anyone in the room over the age of 40, there's one or two of you, us, who would like to be a mentor for somebody like Ellie, we'd like to sign you up through the Esteem program and through the Leadership Roundtable to provide that sort of mentorship, because it's real leadership development for that next generation within a faith context. So thank you.
Bernie Noadera, USCCB. But if you're going to be a mentor, you got to make sure you're background checked and safe environment trained.
Oh, they will. Well, they will be.
Really quickly, just in terms of the statistics and demographics, when you have 20 to 30% of Catholics right now that are just practicing, but not necessarily practicing in the manner in which they're fully participating as a fully initiated Catholic in the church, that call to full ownership, I think, we fall far short, because what's happening is we're becoming a church where it's, what is it that I can get out of it? And they're going in terms of obligation, doing their hour, 10 minutes, and then get out. The reality of what we have is that Sunday is just the beginning, because what really happens is that Sunday is about Monday. But then having to carry that out, so the challenge or question that I propose to the group is the whole idea of having to think outside of the box and having to use creativity, where we're now at this point communicating a message that is relevant, that is at this point using resources that's available that touches the other 80% that's not. Because basically what we're doing is we're talking to the converted. We're talking to those who've had that change, the metanoia. We need to get to the ones that at this point claim to be Catholic but have no clue what that means, or the idea of what we're talking about when we talk about mission and not finding that purpose or the satisfaction of doing something other than just your 9 to 5 or whatever that case may be. We're running into relationships, partnerships with businesses that find it refreshing to be able to give back to society. For example, our relationship right now with Stonebridge Business Partners, who are auditing dioceses. We just met with them last week. And to talk to those auditors and to see the commitment, the compassion, the drive, the motivation, the determination to try to make, to be part of that solution, partnership, of trying to make this church a better church. So being able to then at this point learn from our mistakes, create strategies so that way we bypass these situations, and the type of muscle memory that with situations that arise, we know exactly what we need to do. And then at the same time, trying to reinvigorate, re-energize the enthusiasm of what it means to be a Catholic and what it means to be a universal Catholic, and to find that passion again, to find that what it is that is creating the fire in the belly, if you will. Because many of our saints that we know, I mean, that's what they had to do. They were seen as awfully off the rock or crazy, whatever the case may be, but they stuck to their convictions. So definitely in terms of the importance of mentorship, I'd like to propose, who are our role models? Are we celebrating these role models? And then finally, the idea of calling forth versus doing for. I don't know if you, I mean, you could do a whole series just simply on that, but the idea of being able to empower and at this point allow people to take ownership for what it is and allow them to stand on their own feet.
Thank you, Bernie. It was when he mentioned off your rocker that I thought of you, Jim. Actually, no, when he talked about re-energizing. Since you were our first keynoter and we're now coming towards the end of our time together, you want to pick up on this idea of re-energizing, which is a theme that you have heard through this conference, and one that you suggested that we might look at for the future?
No, I would, yeah, just as I was listening to the several conversations, I thought that might be one theme that we would consider for next year's conference. Re-energizing or revigorating Catholic life in a variety of ways in schools and parish life. But the one that Father Hare has suggested also is, may be one, if not for next year, a year after, because I think that there's a huge potential in conducting some kind of scenario-based simulation playing a game, so to speak. Although real dioceses are going through it, but sometimes when you create a scenario, you learn a heck of a lot from it, and it can derive a lot of good insights from a simulation that help you then when you have to go through it for real. So those are two things that I think jumped out at me.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thanks very much, Dennis. Thanks very much to each and every one of you. Kerry, our intrepid executive director, is going to round us off for this afternoon.
It has been a long... It has been a long, full, vibrant, content-rich 2 days. On behalf of the board and my colleagues on the staff, I thank you so much for your participation and your leadership. Truly, there is no challenge that is so great that we can't meet those challenges as long as we collaborate together. We have everything it takes in this room and in the wider church, and we will be connecting those dots. When we were first created, we set forth a series of guiding principles and maxims and charisms that we hold ourselves accountable to as a leadership roundtable. One of those is that we emulate what we advocate. And from the very beginning, it has been a matter of pride for us that every project, program, or resource we have created, everything you see in your folder, has been done intentionally in partnership with others. There's nothing we have created on our own, and this partnership and collaboration has been key to the fruitfulness and efficacy of what we offer the church. I want to thank the speakers and facilitators, those who led us in prayer, the scribes, all of you for participating. A particular thank you to Mike O'Loughlin and Michael Brough, who shouldered much of the organization and the flawlessness of these 2 days. I am indebted. It's an uncommon joy to truly love, appreciate, and respect one's colleagues, and I am in that luxurious position. At your table, there are evaluation forms, but another one of our maxims is we prize efficiency, and you have already been emailed an electronic version of this evaluation form, so please, we encourage you to fill it out. And then I think the only thing left to say is to remind you that on September 24th in Chicago, we will have an afternoon version of what we have experienced here. And please plan to attend or let us know who your colleagues are who are senior level executives in the church or world in the Midwest. We would like to personally extend them an invitation. Safe travels and God bless you.